Okay, before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this event is being recorded and will be available on the Save Ellis Island YouTube channel. My name is Irene Moan, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Save Ellis Island, the nonprofit partner of the National Park Service dedicated to preserving the historic hospital buildings on Ellis Island. For those who may not be familiar with our work, Save Ellis Island is committed to restoring and sharing the stories of the hospitals on the island's south side, where the immigrants who did not pass the medical inspection were treated. These remarkable buildings are a vital piece of Ellis Island's history, and we strive to protect and preserve them. If you'd like to learn more about the hospitals or experience them firsthand on one of our hard hat tours, please visit us at www.saveellisisland.org. Now, for tonight's author series, we are thrilled to welcome Susan Meissner, who will be discussing her latest book, A Map to Paradise. Susan Meissner is a USA Today best-selling novelist with more than 1 million books in readers' hands and in 18 languages. Her critically acclaimed and award-winning works of historical fiction have been named to numerous lists, including Publisher Weekly's annual roster of 100 best books, Library Read's top picks, Real Simple annual tally of best books, Booklist's top 10, Book of the Month, and Amazon Editor's Pick. Her newest title is A Map to Paradise, a novel about belonging, friendship, and finding one ways home, set in California during the early and scary years of the Cold War. Susan lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband and yellow lab Winston. Susan will be joined tonight in conversation by fellow author Kristina McMorris. Kristina McMorris is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today best-selling author of 2 novellas and 8 historical novels, including the million-copy bestseller Sold on a Monday. The recipient of more than 20 national literary awards, she previously hosted TV shows for Warner Brothers and an ABC affiliate, but beginning at age 9 with an Emmy Award-winning program. She lives in Oregon, where she's the proud mom of 2 collegiate boys who still keep her on the run and make her laugh daily. Thank you so much to Susan and Kristina for being with us here tonight to discuss A Map to Paradise. Before I turn things over to Kristina, I'd like to remind our viewers that if you have any questions for Susan, please type them in the chat box, and Kristina will be watching the chat box throughout the program. Also, if you'd like to purchase a signed copy of Susan's book, you can find it in the Save Ellis Island gift shop on our website. All proceeds from these sales directly support our preservation efforts at Save Ellis Island, so thank you so much to Susan for your generous support of our mission. I can't wait to hear more about A Map to Paradise, so with that, I'll hand it over to Kristina, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Good. Hi. Thanks for that intro. Susan, how are you doing? I know that you just wrapped up tour. I believe we are the grand finale, the caboose of your launch train. So tell me how it went and how you're feeling today.
Oh, it's always scary and wonderful at the same time when a new book is released out into the world, because it was mine for a long time. And then I let it go and it becomes the property of everyone else. So it really is no longer my book. Now it's in the hands of readers, and it's theirs now to enjoy and to get what they might and enjoy from it and learn from it or gather insights from it. So and then of course everyone has their opinion of the books they like. So now I'm hoping that everybody will like this book and love it as much as I do. But it's been a fun tour. It's been fun to be out and about. We writers write in isolation, so it's nice to get out when a book is released, because it gives us a chance to be out among the people that we write for.
Right. So that means like you can't just wear yoga pants and
Right.
like even in the Zooms we're like, sometimes their pajama bottoms happening down here and you guys just would never know. So it's like the party on the bottom. So I think you answered part of it in that answer right there, but I'm curious. I've never asked you this actually. I think I can guess because I write historical fiction as well, but what draws you back over and over to historical fiction? I'm guessing you have thought about writing other genres at some point. And I would love to hear what those are. So there's part of the question, but then also what keeps drawing you back to historicals?
Yeah, when I began writing novels, I did start out writing contemporary. And I think I was kind of finding my way with my early books. Those really early ones are no longer in print. You can get them on Kindle. But I feel like I didn't know which lane was mine. And so I had to kind of experiment a little bit. I had been writing for a newspaper up to that point, which is different kind of writing. And so it was like the world of novels was this gigantic universe, and I had to find my place in it.
Mhm.
And so I wrote contemporaries, and then I wrote a 3-book series they were mysteries. And then in 2008, I wrote my first historical fiction. And it was really a dual time story is what it was. And I realized when I wrote that book, which part of it is based during the Salem witch trials here in America, was how much I loved the process of writing that book. It's still hard work. It's always going to be hard work. But preparing to write that book was so interesting. I loved the research aspect of it. And I loved how historical fiction takes you to the past. It's a time machine. You can travel there safely. You don't have to worry about not being able to get back home. And you really can go back to the past and experience it. A novel can do that. I'm not sure that nonfiction has the same kind of gravitas that a novel does to have the reader feel everything. But historical fiction is uniquely, I think, positioned to have you experience the past. And when you can go back into the past and experience it, then you can also see those hard-won lessons that the past taught us. Sometimes the past gets forgotten, and that means the lessons go by the wayside too. That to me is sad. And I'm always looking for topics then that are perhaps in danger of being forgotten, because I don't want us to forget lessons that we learned along the way, especially if they impacted humanity, those events. We need to keep those lessons with us as we move through time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that you and I've talked about that I think we both always love writing about historical fiction is that on the flip side of that, that people that went through hard times through history and came out the other side, whether, I mean, obviously through the hardships, all of them are very hard won, and it's not like they came out unscathed, but to
Mhm.
find hope on the other side that people have been through this before and we will get through this too.
Yes.
It's, and kind of to hang in there when times get tough. I think that is a real inspiration that we can find from the greatest generation, for example, which you and I have both written quite a bit about World War II. And I think that's one of my favorite things about that.
So true. Yeah, well said.
Absolutely. And then, okay, so tell me, well, let's talk about this book in particular, because as I told you right before we got on here, I'm partway through. And of course, I love all your books. And I'm not just saying that because she paid me $20. No, I'm not just saying that because I love her so much as a dear friend. But I absolutely am just always in awe of your work and how you intertwine lives that I would never think of putting together. And I just am so in awe. So I am so excited to hurry this up so we can get off and then I can go back to reading. So in the meantime, for people who are not familiar much with the book yet, why don't you talk a bit about what the story is about, but also your inspiration?
Sure. Well, this story takes place in the 1950s, and the reason why I chose that decade was it's the decade after World War II. And we've had a lot of really wonderful books especially in this last decade, with the backdrop being World War II, and so many that I'm wondering if people were ready to know, well, what happened after that? World War II is a pretty definitive moment in our collective history. We had to have been changed by it. And so what were those years like? And so I landed on the decade first, and then I zeroed in on my topic. And after I have my topic, that's when I start looking for people to put in the story. Some people start with a character. I always start with the event. And then I look for who can I give this wonderful backdrop to, because it's usually a backdrop where an ordinary person or ordinary people were suddenly thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And that always makes me feel like there's a story just waiting to be told there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you. I have some historical photographs to show you that I think will kind of give some context to the story I'm going to share with you. And then I think visuals always help me when I'm about to read a book. If I can see where the author was headed, I just feel like that gives me kind of like backdoor or access. What do they call that? behind the stage or behind the
Yeah,
scene
behind the
access.
scenes.
There you
Yeah,
go.
absolutely. And as you're starting this, as she's setting this up, just a reminder to all of you to go ahead and if you have questions along the way, you will not be interrupting. Go ahead and please just type those in the chat because I'm sure those questions you're going to have along the way. And that way I can get to them as soon as she finishes this awesome presentation. I've been at ones that she does in person and with this, and they're always fascinating. So
Thank you very much. It's very sweet. So when you're looking at the decade after the war, we're looking at the 1950s, which I wasn't born yet. I was born in 1961, but my parents graduated from high school and fell in love and got married in the 1950s. And whenever I look back at those years that belonged to my parents, what I see, like in their pictures, I mean, awesome fashions. I think 1950s fashions are just terrific and really, really cool cars. I mean, great cars and great music. But the 1950s were also a decade of great fear. And that's because the Cold War was new, it was scary, it was menacing, and no one really knew what it was going to be like to be in it because it wasn't like any other war we had ever fought. That's why it has this weird moniker, the Cold War. It's not like battlefields where we had just, what we had just seen in World War II. We had this new enemy, and the enemy was the USSR. And the crazy thing was, is we were allied with them against the Axis powers. Okay, so in World War II, they were part of the Allied forces. And then all of a sudden, at the end of World War II, everything has inverted. And now, Europe is carved in two. And then you had, Germany was split into two. You had Western occupied zones. You had Soviet-backed occupied zones. And everyone was afraid of the bomb. And it was a capital B. And I remember when I was in school, crawling under my desk when the civil defense siren would go off. This photograph I found on the internet is dated in the 1950s, and we were all told this is what you need to do in case of a bomb. And when I was a child crawling under my desk, I didn't appreciate what we were doing. I remember my friends and I were kind of giggling when we would go under our desks and put our hands over our heads. We really didn't appreciate what we were actually like practicing, and the fact that I was born and raised in San Diego. It was a Navy town. We were probably a very likely target, and no desk would have protected you from a bomb had there been one. But what it was, this fear of the bomb and the fear of a communist takeover, and this fear that there were communists in your neighborhood, subversive people who were trying to look for an in to topple the American government, all of that was very real. We see movies about it. You've probably seen the television series, The Americans. It all plays off of that fear. And McCarthyism, which you may or may not have heard of if you're my age, you probably studied it in high school or college. But McCarthyism was this idea that we have to find all the communists in our midst, because if we don't, they will bring in, there'll be acts of treason, and they will bring in the downfall of the American democracy, and we will become a Soviet state too. So that was the huge fear. It meant that home hung in the balance. And I don't mean your address. I mean home with a capital H. Like everything that made you feel safe and secure, your sense of belonging, all of that felt like it was at risk. And that's a pretty scary feeling. And it interested me quite a bit because World War II displaced 11 million people. So DP, displaced persons, that was a proper noun right after the war. We didn't have any displaced persons camps here in the United States, but in Europe, and especially in Germany, there were over 800 DP camps, displaced persons camps, after the war. And a lot of them were in the Western occupied zones. And what had happened is, after the war, all the people that had been brought into Germany as forced labor or forced military, or they were political refugees. Well, now they are homeless. The war is over. There were actually 700,000 Holocaust survivors. If you can imagine, there were 700,000 of them that managed to survive those terrible years in the concentration camps. So all of these people are homeless and they're living in these DP camps. And for some of them, going home isn't an option. Because let's say you're from Warsaw and you were brought over into Germany as forced labor against your will early in the war, and you've been working in a munitions factory for 4 long years, laboring for the Reich. Well, if you go home to Warsaw, or if you go home to Ukraine, or wherever you're from, Lithuania, any of the Baltic states, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, you could be arrested for being a traitor. The Soviets saw having worked for the Reich as an act of treason. You could be arrested, you could be executed, or you could find yourself on a train to the Gulag in Siberia. And the Gulag wasn't just one prison camp in the middle of nowhere, practically the North Pole. It was a series of almost 1,000 different camps. And a lot of people never came back from the Gulag. And so for you, going home was like, I can't go home to Warsaw. I can't. Number one, I'll be arrested. Or number two, I don't want to live under Soviet rule. I don't want to live that way. A lot of these displaced people did eventually go home, but 1 million of them did not. And that interested me too. Where did all these people go then? So those two topics I liked. I liked the idea that there was this fear that home could be taken from us, much the way it was taken from these millions of people in Europe. And the fact that there was a witch hunt for communists in Hollywood, I thought that was very interesting. And so I took those two topics and I married them together. And so the story is really about 3 women who really have nothing in common except that they're all going to meet each other on the same cul-de-sac in Malibu in 1956. One of them is named Melanie. She is a Hollywood would-be starlet. All she's ever wanted to be is a Hollywood movie star. That's it, nothing else. She's finally made her one big break. She had one movie that came out to much acclaim, and it had only been out for like 6 months when she is put on the Hollywood blacklist as being a communist or a communist sympathizer. It's not true, but during those years, it didn't matter. And what had happened was her co-star in this movie she had been in, who was also her love interest at the time, he had been ratted out as a possible communist sympathizer because it had been reported that he had gone to some meetings some years before. And she's his co-star. She is dating him. So she's labeled as a communist sympathizer just because of association. She doesn't even really know what a communist thinks because she wasn't paying attention in school. They talked about it. She wanted to be a movie star. And so now she's hiding out in Malibu because she can't get work. No studio would hire someone on the blacklist, not for television, not for film. She's hiding out because of prying eyes, the press, and because her co-star doesn't want her being handed a subpoena to testify back in Washington, D.C. She doesn't want him talking. He does not want her talking to anyone about what he might have done or what he might have said. So he's kind of keeping her quiet in luxury, in paradise, if you will. Now, Melanie has a housekeeper named Eva, and Eva is a true DP. She's a displaced person from Eastern Europe. What Melanie doesn't know is that Eva is not from Poland, as she says in her immigration papers. And what she tells people, she's actually ethnic German who was born and raised in Russia. So she's a Russian citizen, but an ethnic German. And I'll just say this really quickly, that back in the time of Catherine the Great, there was a whole bunch of really great farmland along the Volga River in Russia. And she offered it to anyone in Germany who wanted to come live there and farm there. She would give them the land, just come, come, come. And a bunch of them came from the Hessen region of Germany, the northern part. They went over into this beautiful farmland and put down stakes. They had kind of a special citizenship because they were able to retain their German, not their citizenship, but their ethnic German ways, their traditions. They could speak German in the home, but they learned Russian on the outside. Well, she's one of those Volga Germans. And so she feels like she's doubly the enemy because, America fought against Germany. And now America is, in pretty much at war with Russia. So she has lied about her immigration papers. She's also grieving the loss of everyone and everything she loved because she lost it all in World War II. She lost it all. And so for her, her losses are in the past, but they're big losses, and so the pain is fresh. For Melanie, Her loss is happening right now. Right now is she's feeling displaced. Next door is June. And June is a widow caring for her agoraphobic brother-in-law. He's a screenwriter. His name is Elwood. He does not leave his house. Those reasons are borne out in the book. But June was married to his fraternal twin. And together, the two of them cared for Elwood up until Frank's death some years before. And in the intervening years, June has fallen in love with her brother-in-law. She's kind of wondering what it might have been like if she had fallen in love with Elwood instead of his brother, Frank. Frank left her nothing. He was a nice guy, but very careless with money. And so she's living in Elwood's house, caring for him, housekeeping, helping him type his scripts up, doing what she can to like cut his hair since he doesn't leave the house. But if he dies, she has nothing. She has seen his will. She's not married to him. If she was, then if he died, well, that would, in California, it's community property. She would get the marital assets. But she gets nothing if he dies and he's not well. So for her, her displacement, if you will, is imminent. It's like right around the corner. So they're all facing this loss of home. Either it's happened, is happening, or it's going to happen. And they're going to become rather strange allies because, as you know, in a book, if there are secrets, they're bound to come out in the pages of the book, and they do in this one for sure. Now, I will say that in Hollywood, there actually were some communists, nowhere near the 300 whose names were on that blacklist, but the scare was real. And I think it's because in Hollywood, it's the dream factory. It's where all of all of our entertainment all of our visual entertainment, came out of Hollywood. And I think because we have so many ways now of expressing our social commentary, because we're doing it right now. Back then, there was no internet. There were no platforms other than a soapbox on a street corner. But back then, the arts, the film and television were kind of like telling us what mattered to us and showing us what's important and kind of giving commentary to the world around us. And so I think it was McCarthy and all of his people who thought there are communists in Hollywood and they're writing scripts and they're bringing in communist ideology to try and brainwash people. That's why the witch hunt happened in Hollywood. And there actually were some. The Hollywood 10, as they were known, they were quite famous for being the Hollywood 10. They were 10 writers and directors in Hollywood in the 1940s who were ratted out as being communist thinkers. And you know what? They probably might have been. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at them because they were not part of my story, but Trumbo is one of them. You might have heard of him. There was a movie, a biopic about Trumbo, the screenwriter, and Bryan Cranston played the role. He probably was a communist in ideology. Well, anyway, these 10 men were all subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee, the HUAC. They are all subpoenaed to come to Washington and testify, prove their loyalty to the United States, and name names. Tell us who else is a communist. And they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't go. And they said, we're not coming because that's a violation of our First Amendment rights. And your First Amendment rights are the same as theirs. And you have the right to freedom of expression. You have the right to dissent, and you have the right to assemble. And they said, that's all we're doing. We're assembling, we're dissenting, and we have the right to say it. And what you don't have the right to do is commit an act of treason, and you don't have the right to incite violence. You don't have those rights, but you do have the right to dissent, to assemble and talk about what you don't like, even if it's your own government, and the right to say it. So they wouldn't go, and they were held in contempt, and they faced prison sentences. Well, a whole bunch of Hollywood actors, other writers, they wanted to stand in solidarity with these 10 men. And that picture of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, Danny Kaye was in that group, Lucille Ball was in that group, Katharine Hepburn was in that group. They wanted to stand in solidarity, and a bunch of them flew out to Washington to kind of be in the chambers and say, it's true, you shouldn't be stepping on their First Amendment rights. And nothing changed. And they came back from that trip having accomplished really nothing except they showed solidarity. And their agents and producers and directors says, you need to back away from this. You'll be blacklisted if you don't. And they did. They kind of backed away. And so what you began to see is people getting blacklisted for having any kind of sympathy or empathy towards someone who was a known communist. Hence my story of Melanie. Now, there was one actress who you might remember, Lee Grant. She was in the movie Shampoo with Warren Beatty. And I think she won an Oscar for that role. I think that was 1975. She was also in Peyton Place, the television series. That was in the early 70s. Well, before the 70s, before all of that, she was a blacklisted Hollywood actress. She was on the blacklist for 12 long years. And the reason why was her husband was ratted out as a communist when she was 29. So we're talking way back in the late 1940s, early 1950s. He probably was one. She was blacklisted just because she was married to him. And the HUAC was thinking, well, she probably knows who he hangs out with, like who comes to their house. Who does he have telephone conversations with? Who does he meet for lunch? And so she was told, if you come to Washington and testify and name names, you will get off the blacklist. And she wouldn't do it. She said, I'm not going to do what's been done to me, is to name names of people who are quite likely innocent. So she wouldn't do it. And she was on the blacklist for 12 years. So I based Melanie a tiny bit on Lee because the premise is the same, is that she was labeled a communist when she was innocent and then asked to name names. I had to pick a location that was Hollywood adjacent, because I didn't want Melanie to be too far from her world, Hollywood. And Malibu was the perfect choice. One is because it already is paradise. It's a beautiful, ruggedly beautiful, Kristina, because Pepperdine, where you went to school, is right there in that neck of the woods. Lots of Hollywood stars had like beach houses out on Malibu. So they would like work during the week. And then it wasn't that long of a drive, maybe 40, 50 minutes from LA to get out to your beach house and relax. And so there's that aspect, there's that tie-in. And then there's the fact that it already is a paradise. If you're already living in paradise, who needs a map? You're already there. But it's not paradise for these three women because of their losses. It does not feel like paradise to them. And so that's why I chose Malibu. And there's another reason that I can tell you about maybe in the question answer time, I can tell you about that. Now, really quickly, the displaced persons camps that I told you about and from where Eva comes, these are just a few pictures from the Imperial War Museum. Lots of children were born in these DP camps. And the American government passed what they call the Displaced Persons Act, and it allowed them to bring in 400,000 of the last million who had nowhere to go under special quotas because, back then, we had immigration quotas. And it was really difficult to go above them, but this congressional act allowed 400,000 of them to come to America. So Eva would be one of those who came to the United States through those that Displaced Persons Congressional Act. And the last one, if you can believe this, the last one closed in 1957. And if you do the math, that's 12 long years after the war. That's a long time to be without a home. Now, June is the one character whose backstory is the most subtle. She's not a war refugee. She's not a blacklisted Hollywood actress. She's just a widow caring for her agoraphobic brother-in-law, Elwood, who's a screenwriter. And, she does all the things that a wife would. She almost has the life of a wife, except they don't have any kind of physical relationship, And of course, she's not his she's not his spouse. She will get nothing if he dies. And the thing for her is her whole world has shrunk to this beautiful house in Malibu and taking care of that man. She really has nothing else, no other life than this. And so she actually stands to lose quite a bit more than just the house and her job. And that's part of her secret. And that will come out in the pages of the story as well. So you have these three women who are all will face, or have faced the loss of everything that defines them. That's the loss of home, and that's the loss of your sense of belonging. And our desire to belong, our desire to be where we belong is pretty strong. And these three women are going to because they have that in common and nothing else, they will nevertheless rally around each other. When secrets start to fall out into the open, and then some other obstacles come their way that they're going to have to deal with if they're going to try and hang on, to their last vestiges of what defines them. So I love this quote. I'm not sure if you can read it. I might just scooch this over here so I can read it to you fully. A house is made of walls and beams. A home is built with love and dreams. And I just love that. So this is where you can find me if you have any questions that you don't want to ask in the chat. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or just reach out to me, whatever you might want to chat about. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and let's see if we have any questions for me, Kristina.
Yeah. So what's your feeling about, have you been to Malibu recently?
I have not been since, well, January was terrible. I did not, and I didn't go actually for this trip because I had been there before.
Right.
So the last time I was there was probably 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm sure you've seen the images too, and it's heartbreaking to see.
It is so hard for me because I started writing this book 2 years ago.
Right.
And, I knew there was a fire in Malibu in 1956. And it's sad to say that Malibu is known as the wildfire capital of North America. On average, there will be a devastating wildfire in Malibu or around Malibu. There'll be 2 of them every decade. And it's been that way for the last 100 years. It's just where it's geographically placed. It's the mountains. There's all these beautiful mountains in between Malibu and LA. And they have something to do with it. And the Santa Ana winds that cause these wildfires, they come every year, and sometimes they come at the same time every year, and sometimes they don't. And they're called devil winds because they're ferocious, and the wind speeds are incredible, and they always come with hot temperatures. And Southern California doesn't get enough rain.
Right.
So when you combine the hot winds, the high temperatures, and tender dry grass, all it takes is 1 downed power line, and you'll have a wildfire. 2 downed power lines, and then you have 2. And then you can just see what happens when they multiply, which is what happened in January in the Pacific Palisades. And of course, Malibu is its neighbor. There were plenty of homes that were lost on the Pacific Coast Highway in between those 2 communities. My heart goes out to everybody and anybody who lost anything in those fires. And I apologize if my book is a trigger there. I just feel like I need to let people know that if you experience that loss, that there is a fire in this book. And I didn't make it up. It really did happen in 1956. But I think with that metaphor of fire, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in San Diego. I remember being evacuated from my elementary school a couple of times, junior high a couple of times. There was a fire in 2008 that was awful in San Diego. And I had, in my book club of 15 women, 2 of them lost their homes. 17 members of my church family lost their homes. It was awful. And so I know what it's like to be in and around it and to run from it because we had to evacuate our house. But I don't know what it's like to lose. And what a wildfire wants, and I can say this because I've seen it happen over the course of my life, is it wants what belongs to you. It wants your home. And so just thinking about that metaphorically is that's what these women are facing, is the loss of a force that wants to take their home. And what I also have discovered is Malibu always rebuilds. They always rebuild. And there's hope in that. I feel like that's a hopeful thought, that they continue to rebuild, and they continue to do it smarter. They continue to look for new ways for drought tolerant landscaping. They look for new ways to, we don't plant eucalyptus trees anymore. For a long time, Southern California is full of eucalyptus trees because they're really pretty. They grow in Australia. And so our temperatures, our climates are relatively the same, but eucalyptus trees are highly flammable. So we're learning as we go. And so each time Malibu rebuilds, I feel like each time it's getting stronger and smarter. And maybe one day there will be seasons that will go by where the wildfires will have met their match. I hope.
Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. I remember being there in sophomore year. I was fortunate enough to do an overseas program that year. and they had the wildfires back there. And so that was a surreal experience, and that we were fortunate, the 40 of us that were living together in a villa over in Florence. It's a hard life. We were, as if we weren't spoiled enough.
Right.
But hearing about it back then, we didn't
Yeah.
have mobile phones and any kind of alerts, except that we were hearing kind of through the director of our program, and we would hear news from fax through the fax machine in the villa.
Oh,
That's the
wow.
only way that we communicated immediately. Or, we had one payphone in the villa that we could use, and we had to use a card for it. And that was the only way and you had that international delay and all of that. And that was back then. So we
Right.
really were hearing about it from a distance and hoping we had a school that was still there when we got
Wow.
back, and hoping our friends were okay, and
Mhm.
knowing everybody evacuated to what was called Firestone Fieldhouse, being the big kind of gym and auditorium. So yeah, so it's wild to see it all happen again. But like you said, to your point, that it's amazing how fast humans are so resilient, and
Mhm.
society can be so resilient. And when we
Mhm.
look, that's one of the things that I think you and I find so inspirational when we see World War II stories,
Yes.
and that we
Yes.
see the photographs of the devastation of entire cities, and in such a very short time, when given enough resources
Mhm.
and help, that they can rebuild so quickly that it's mind blowing, truly.
Yeah.
And you would
Yeah.
never know walking around in Paris or in Germany that
Right.
places have
Right.
been completely bombed. So that
Yeah.
was it's a nice bit of hope in kind of a dark
Yeah.
time. So on probably a little bit of a lighter note, hopefully, can you tell me, why don't you share with everyone maybe what surprised you most in the research, since you did quite a bit, as you just shared with us?
Yeah, I think that's the most surprising part was I didn't know um, the humanitarian crisis that was the DP camp system. I had no idea there were that many displaced persons. I mean, 11 million people, that's for some countries, that's their entire population. Uh, it's a staggering number of people made homeless by war, and the plight of those who could not return for the reasons I mentioned. That to me was just staggering, and it explained why a little while back I had met a friend of my mom's, and she was telling me that she was Lithuanian, and she remembers coming over here after the war. I thought, oh, how nice, they came over here after the war. Well, no, they were probably in a DP camp, and I just didn't know how many people could not return home. Like it was not an option for them um, because of the threat of being arrested or executed or deported to a gulag. So my heart goes out to them. There's a great book that I used in research that if this is of interest to anybody listening or watching, it's by David Nasaw, Nasaw, and it's called The Last Million. And he did his homework. It's a really good, well-vetted book, and it goes into much better and greater detail about the plight of the DPs after World War II.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got some great comments and questions that are coming in. And if anybody thinks of more, go ahead and please just add them in, and we'll get to them before we're done here. So this is so fun, since the book is so new. It's exciting that some people are already reading the story and have already finished it. How about that?
Oh,
They
wow.
finished it before you even finished
Oh,
with your
that's so
tour.
scary.
So Jennifer says that she read A Map to Paradise on audiobook. So she listened to it and adored it. I was wondering if you have a say in this is a great question, who narrates your books, and if you've ever written a book and thought, I can't wait to hear this on audio. So those are two really great
Those
questions.
are great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. I do have some say in who gets chosen as the narrator. What usually happens is the production people will send me 3 or 4 MP3 files or links to audio files of people they think would be really good for the book. And these are people who are in the industry at my publishing company. So they kind of pay attention, and they usually know more about the voices than I do. And so, and it's been my experience that usually one of those 3 is just the perfect person. There was one time I think where they sent me 3 files, and none of them clicked for me. And they're like, "That's fine. We'll just go back and we'll look for someone else. What kind of person are you looking for? That kind of thing." But for this one, I heard, oh, I can't remember her name, Lisa. I think it's Lisa. I should go back and make sure. I think her name is Lisa. But anyway, I heard her voice, and I thought she's the one, because someone needed to be able to do all the different, like, Ava needed to sound a certain way, and and June needed to sound a certain way. Melanie did too, even though she's American. You know, she's from Nebraska. So I was really encouraged when I listened to other audio files of this person. I thought she's the one. And unlike some of my other writer friends who use the same narrator for each book, I tend to look for the one who's going to fit the character the best. Like I always listen to Louise Penny's books on audio, and she's had the same narrator. I think she just with this last book, her most recent one retired after like 12 books or something.
Oh.
Yeah, and so you get to have like there's a sense of like carryover. Each time you listen to a Louise Penny book, it's that same voice. You begin to know that voice as the voice of Armand Gamache and all that. But mine, it's like, no, Melanie is different than Sophie in The Nature of Fragile Things. And so I always look for like the unique voice that no one is going to like say, oh, that's Sophie from The Nature of Fragile Things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I've been very, very happy with my audiobook narrators. I can't imagine how anyone else doing what they did for these books.
Right.
And I think your other question was, what was the other half of her question?
Well, I'll get back to it, but I will insert really fast. Just Mindy on here, she's like, okay, teacher's pet. She like immediately looked it up. Well, I already looked it up to see who the narrator was, but yeah. All right. We tied Mindy. Okay. So it's because definitely, yeah, our narrators are amazing and love giving them credit. So Lisa Flanagan.
Thank you, Lisa Flanagan. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you've got tour brain. So, but the fact you got Lisa's name right is absolutely right. So yes, so people have to check that out, listen to her as well. And I do love doing that. So yeah, the other question, part of the question was if you've ever written a book and thought, oh, I cannot wait to hear this on audio. Do you listen to your own books on audio? So that's a good question.
I don't listen to them. I don't know if you do, Kristina, but
No.
I have met very few colleagues who ever read or listen to their books. I can't think of any right now off the top of my head. Maybe there are some that we've had discussions and I probably picked their brain to see why. But I think all of us would agree that once, like I mentioned earlier at the top of this broadcast, once you give the book out to the world, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the readers and it's theirs to enjoy. And you're done with it, And so to reread it or to re-listen to it is almost like a slow torture because you can't change anything. You've given it away. You gave it away. And so to listen to it again or to read it again, I think a lot of us would want to change something or like reintroduce or something, and you can't. And so maybe I wouldn't feel that way. Maybe I would read one of my books and go, oh, I really like that. I wouldn't change a thing. But the fear that I would be like, I wish I could go back.
Well, I can't imagine that we'd ever, and you and I worked together on a collaborative book. So, no, never. I think it's, it made me feel better when I heard like Johnny Depp never watches his own movies.
Is that right?
Yeah, because he would be too self-conscious, and too aware, I think, of his mannerisms instead of just being in the moment and in his character and stuff. And I think there's a similarity there, but I think we always, I love to say that our co-author, of course, with When We Had Wings is Ariel Lahan, and I'm sure many of you love her work too. And I remember, I think she said, she's great. She quoted, I think someone else, I can't think of who she quoted, but she said that a book is never done. It's just due. And I thought that was a great, I'm like, yes.
It's so true.
That is so true. If we could go through it 10 more times, we would always find, we'll just tweak one word, tweak a little bit, tweak at least that. So of course, with saying nothing about our awesome narrators, that we wouldn't, I listened to just a quick little sample. Like I think each one I've listened to just, about 10 seconds. I'm like, they did such a good job. And then I just because I know that yes, I would just hear something that I want to change, and that is completely on me. So yeah. And what about cover then? Have you talk a little bit about the cover for this book? If it was the first one out of the gate, or did you have 20?
I love this cover so much because what it is you wonder, well, who is it on the cover? And a lot of my covers are this way. It's not like this is one of the characters in the book. It could be any one of them. They live in the 1950s. It could be Melanie. It could be June. It could be Eva. And so it's representative of all of them. But what it does do is it seals the time and place in a really great way. And because she's wearing sunglasses and her mouth is kind of like almost open, but not quite, It's like she's about to say something, but she's afraid to say it. It just seems to me that it's more than just a woman with a scarf wearing sunglasses. Like there's something happening already in her world, which begs the question, well, what is it? What is happening to her? I must know. I must get the book and find out. So for me, it's a very evocative cover because it evokes a response. There's a question in her in the way she's looking. And when I when they get to the point where they're about to do the cover, they'll say, my publisher, they'll say, do you have any ideas for the cover? Which I appreciate. And usually I don't know what I want because I can't think visually. I'm just a word girl. I can appreciate visual beauty, but I don't know how to create it. So what I'll do is I'll send them like 10 covers of books I really think are cool that might have a slight kind of hint of the same thematic pull, as my book. And this book is, there's the ocean, there's Malibu, it's the 50s. Elwood has a rose garden. The rose garden plays a significant role because he's an agoraphobe and he used to enjoy his roses. And he's at the point now he won't even go out and prune his own rose bushes in his own backyard. And so the rose bushes are there. So I thought maybe we should have some roses and maybe a house with the roses and there's the beach and the palm trees. And of course, all of my ideas they wouldn't have worked. This is the one that worked. And so I'm glad that they want my input and they take it and go, okay, we know what to do.
Recycle in the recycle bin.
Because there's no way any of my ideas would have captured what this cover captures. And so I'm very grateful for the art department at Berkeley. They are amazing people.
That's awesome. And was this the first one that they sent you, or did you have other
It's
iterations?
the only one.
Wow.
The only one. What my editor will do, and I like this about her, is they will decide this is the one, and they'll send it out and they'll say, what do you think? And they won't say anything else other than, what do you think? And if I were to say, no, this doesn't work at all. And if I gave the reasons why, they would go, oh, okay. And then we would all go back to the drawing board. I think that's how it would work. Because you and I had that collaboration when we had Wings.
Yeah.
And I remember we had a lot of different discussions about the cover. So sometimes the first iteration is not the best. And you keep working at it until you get the one that you feel really captures the book. And with this one, they just nailed it, the first one. And it happened with Only the Beautiful too, which is that one behind me. There are a number of different directions that book could have gone because it's set in California. It's about the eugenics movement. It's also about what happened in Nazi-occupied Vienna. There are a lot of different ways that cover could have gone. And I didn't know what to do with it. And this is what they came up with. And it was perfect.
Yeah,
my editor said when they sent it to her first, she cried when she saw it because she knew it was the one. And she didn't even want to see all the other composites. She didn't want to see them because she was so in love with this one. She didn't want to mess with it. So I never saw any of the other iterations of these covers. They were perfect from the beginning.
That's great.
And I don't know how they do that. I don't know how their batting average with that is pretty awesome.
Right. That's amazing. I don't know. I've had, I guess the last couple books, it's been a matter of going through a lot of covers.
Yes.
So, and
I feel very lucky in that respect.
Yeah. And sometimes there's even a spoiler on the cover that, with an image.
Oh,
and you're like,
you're
no,
like,
they can't know that yet. And, I even
Mhm.
had questions of like, how is that a spoiler? I'm like, oh, it is, and so I'm always so grateful when they ask us, to give input instead of just sitting going, here you go, and of course I've had that happen too in the past where it was just like, where it was, came up with some great covers, but it was a matter of like coming in the mail and going, surprise, here's your cover. Like, hope you like it. You're like, oh, and there may be reasons why, I'd had other thoughts and stuff. So it's really nice when they bounce it off of us too. I really, really appreciate that collaborative effort. So one of the comments here too, I just want to share that Suzanne said, and this goes back to the fire when we were talking about that, which is she said, fire is such an important metaphor. It brings both destruction and purification. And I totally agree with that, I think, I know you were thinking of that in the story, but also the chance at rebirth, right? You have that opportunity of rebirth. And I think that is just so beautiful at the end of something so dark. Anne-Marie has a question. She says, can you talk a little more about the displaced persons caps? What were they? Oh, sorry, it says where were they? Camps. Oh, I think she means camps. Camps. I
Yeah,
thought she meant like, quote, like the maximums. So camps, and
right.
where were they?
Yeah, yeah, no, I hear you. They were all over the Western occupied zones of Germany. There were some in Italy too, and in Britain. Those are the main places where they were located. And the Western occupied zones are like everything kind of west of um, well, if you can picture what Germany looked like during when we had East and West Germany, that's pretty much was the dividing line. And so there was a British occupied zone and a French occupied zone, and we had an occupied zone. And that's where most of the camps were located because that's where all the displaced people were. If you were displaced in the Eastern Bloc countries, I don't think there, I don't know how, there was no help for you. I don't think there was any help to be found other than the Berlin airlift. There was that, and part of the Marshall Plan was to just try and help, you know. But as far as DP camps in the Western occupied zones, they were all over the place. There was a huge one in Stuttgart, for example, and they were in like monasteries, they were in old dormitories, they were in military institutions that the Reich had used. As far as I know, they did not use the concentration camps for any of those. That would have been awful. And so they would make use of any kind of facility that could be turned into like temporary housing, except it wasn't really temporary, right? It was for some people they were there for a multiple years. And if that's of interest to you, you could the Imperial War Museum, Britain's Imperial War Museum, has a wonderful digital archive. You could go in there after we're done here or tomorrow or something and just look up the displaced persons camps post World War II and find out where they all were located if that's of interest, and many more pictures.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we only have a couple minutes left. So first, just a reminder before you guys log off, she's going to talk about what she's working on next, whether she likes it or not. And so don't leave us yet. But just a reminder to help support Save Ellis Island. And so if you have not purchased, or if you have, but you think of somebody else, now that you've heard more about it today and about the stories, about the research that went involved and the characters, to go ahead and purchase, a book for a friend or family member makes a great gift, and you'd be supporting Save Ellis Island at the same time. So make sure and buy it from their website. So Susan, go ahead and wrap up by letting us know, you always love this, right? I always say as soon as like the book is out immediately, and then they say, what's next? That I always joke that it feels like we're in the hospital and we
Right.
since we're both mothers, and said, we
Yeah.
just had the baby, and they're like, so when's the next one? Yeah. And you're like, you need to calm down. But of course, that's such a compliment because people want to know what you're working on next. So can you talk about the next project?
Yeah, I can talk about it in really broad terms. It's being written. Like I'm not done with the first draft yet. And until that first draft is done, I'm not even really sure I know what it's about, because as I'm writing it, things develop. There's an intuitive process that happens. I'm a plotter. I do plot, but things happen as I'm writing. What I thought was going to happen doesn't end up happening. Something better or bigger happens. That's always fun, because if I didn't see it coming, then you won't either. But I can tell you that it's set in the 1960s, which I'll have you know is now fair game for historical fiction, which just kills me because I was born in the 60s. So now, the decade in which I was born is now historical fiction. And actually the 70s are right there too, sad to say, because if it's happened more than 50 years ago, it can be shelved as historical fiction. So yes, it happened. The book is going to happen in the 1960s. I'm using my own hometown of San Diego, partly because I just haven't availed myself of a place I'm very familiar with. I was born and raised there, spent a lot of my married life there. So it's set in San Diego, a town I know well. And it's set in 1968, which was a hard year, and 1969, which was a hopeful year. And I think in broad terms, I can tell you the book is about our collective longing for the transcendent, which is a big way of saying we want to know that there's more than just this. Like, is this all there is? Isn't there more? And when we look up in the sky suggests that there's more. The stars just suggest there's more. And if you'll remember 1969, which is where I'm leading, the book begins in 68, hard year, and it leads up to July of 1969. And July of 1969, man walked on the moon, which was the world looking up again after a hard year, 1968. Everybody was looking down because it was just so sad. The two assassinations were in 68. The Tet Offensive was in 68. As far as the Vietnam conflict, 68 was a hard, hard year. And we long to look up, and we long to look up in hope. And, with the moon, with walking on the moon, like punching out of the earth and landing on another, if you will, landing on another planet, I think was huge. And it just kind of restored our longing to know that there's more. And so that's really all I can tell you without, because I don't know what's going to be a spoiler yet. So I can't say much about the characters, except that it's three women. Not because I always have to write books about three women, but that's just how this book landed. It's a mother and her high school daughter, and that mother's mother. So we have a grandmother, we have a mother, and we have a high school senior. So these three people represent kind of like three separate generations, and they're all looking at the world as it was in 1968. And they're all like in different places of needing to look up and to look up in hope. So it has no title yet. So
okay. So it's and what book number will that be? What novel is
we
have to go back and add up, don't you?
The thing is, I never know if I should count my collaborations because there's a few of those. Do you count your collaborations?
Yeah, I do when it's a whole novel, not an anthology. But yeah, because we really did. I mean, we wrote our third, but we weren't on the whole thing. So
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I think we're at 25.
Oh my gosh.
I'm gonna need to do that math again because I'm not really sure. I need to count my collaborative work and the works that aren't in print any longer, even though you can't get them on Kindle. So I can make sure, because I get asked that question. I'm always changing the number.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I know sometimes I go, I've had 8 novels, which sounds like nothing now. That's like the beginning of yours. Hang on one second. Don't go away. There we go. Okay, I'm back. Noisy neighbors. Goodness gracious. Okay. So, yeah, but 8 novels and you just were warming up. Okay, so that is all kinds of crazy. But I would say like 12 or 13. I'm like, I think it's 12 or 13 stories, and I go, I don't know. Like it's that we don't know the number, but we knew that just tells you how in a fog we are at all times.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here, but also just want to say I do need to mention this because Tessa sounds like she's joined us today. She said she looks forward to reading the book, but also seeing you at the Historical Novel Society conference in Las Vegas in June. We should absolutely mention that because we are both going to be there. And not only are we both going to be there, we are doing a panel together. So people, if you're not sure, haven't heard of it before and you love historical fiction, you want to come and meet some of your very favorite authors who are we're lucky enough to call really close friends, like Kate Quinn and Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb. And I mean, we could go on and on. They're all going to be there. So, and that is, I want to say June 26th through the 28th, if I remember right. So, and it's in Vegas. So, whatever happens in Vegas, like apparently with historical people, it should definitely, well, actually we can't say stays in Vegas because we're historical authors. So they'll end up in our books.
Yeah, we'll end up writing about it. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll change all the names. So
that's
don't
right.
So don't worry. Is there anything, let's see here, anything to share before we go? I think just lots of thank yous, and they enjoyed today, which is fabulous. Your book sounds amazing. Everybody wants to read it. And I think that kind of wraps everything up. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks so much for coming, and do support the, when you buy a book, when you buy one of these books, these have all been donated to Save Ellis Island. And so 100% of your purchase goes back to restore the hospital buildings. And they were the setting of A Fall of Marigolds. So if you loved that book, your purchase, and it's signed, these are signed copies, that purchase will help restore the buildings there that were the setting for A Fall of Marigolds.
Sounds good. All right, everyone. Everybody enjoy
Thanks for coming.
It's almost weekend. It's happy hour somewhere. So everybody go enjoy your evenings. And it was good to see you again, Sue.
Always. Mwah.
Love you so much. And I'll see you
Bye.
soon. Okay. Bye, everyone.